Okay, so your 6 and 8 mark questions are going to be the ones at the end of each of the sections that you do. They're going to be the ones that require you to write a more essay-style response. And they are going to be the ones that have a significant chunk of the marks percentage-wise attached to them. Approximately about 20% of the marks will be in one of the questions, depending on how the marks are structured. You need to think of putting a structured response together. It will require a number of peeled paragraphs, usually 2 or 3. If you've got a 6 mark question, you'll need 2 peeled paragraphs. If you've got an 8 mark question, you should try and do 2 or 3. The number doesn't really matter, it's the quality of your response in this case. You need to make sure that you clearly link everything that you say back to the question, pick some evidence and then link it specifically. Make sure it's clear why you've said what you've said right at the end. You should aim to use a case study, even if you haven't been told to do so. One of the things that I was trying to get across to you from the Walking Talking mock was that one of the things that the examiner would like you to do is name somewhere and use specific examples as often as you possibly can. Just naming a place isn't enough. Actually have some information that you're going to try and use that's relevant, so that you can put that in as your first E in your peeled paragraph. Finally, often these come with a 3 mark spelling, punctuation and grammar element. That 3 marks is added on top. So in the case that you've got in the bottom right hand corner, it's a 6 mark plus 3, so that makes this the response here is worth 9 marks. They can be 8 plus 3, therefore 11. Out of 43, you've nearly got a quarter of your marks in that one response. It's marked using levels, so it doesn't matter. They're not counting how many spelling mistakes or punctuation mistakes you make. It's within your general response. If you use low-level words throughout and no high-level key terms at any point in time, you can't achieve a good spelling, punctuation and grammar mark. You've got to make sure that you use them frequently and accurately and spell them correctly most often. In those questions, the ones which have the SPAG 3 marks, they are the only time that your spelling, punctuation and grammar is going to be assessed individually. Remember that you're communicating with a person though, so you're trying to make sure that this person has an image of you as a high-level candidate in their head. So the more often you can use high-level words, the more accurate you can be with your spelling, punctuation and grammar, the better you're going to do. So first question. You'll have seen something like this before. Your 6 and 8 mark questions very often come along with a figure. My advice is to use the figure, but don't rely on it too heavily. So you should bring quite a lot of the information. You should be thinking about what you can say to answer the question and then use the figure to back it up as well as the information that you have. I have got a structure for you that I'm going to show you in a minute. What I'd like you to do with the people around you is just have a think about what can you see on the picture first, what key terms do you know, and do you need to define perhaps to help you to answer the question, and then finally what case study and what case study information do you think you're going to need? So this is the way that I go about doing that. This is the way I'd go about answering the question. I'd start off with a kind of, for me, I'd want to give a general introduction to what managed retreat is. The important part of these questions, the important thing to remember, is that you don't just give all of the information that you have about managed retreat without actually answering the question. In previous sessions we've talked very specifically about making sure you do what the question's asking in relation to how and why. In this case, you need to explain how managed retreat reduces the risk of coastal flooding. So how does it take risk away from people? Now that can be socially, economically, environmentally. How essentially does it keep people safer from the coast being flooded near to where they live? So I would very early on name an example that I'd study and probably say something that happened in that example. From that point, I'd want to explain how whatever happens in that example, so in your case this is the Wallasey Wetlands Creation Scheme, how does that reduce, not stop, but how, not stop coastal flooding, that's not what they're looking to do, but how does it reduce the risk of people to coastal flooding? You need to explain how it does it, and then you need to give evidence, ideally from the extract. So if you've said something like the amount of space that allows the water to spread into because of the increased intertidal zone reduces the risk of flooding, you need to talk about, one, how does that happen in the Wallasey Wetlands Creation Scheme and how do you know, and then two, what can you see on the picture? And a nice thing to do here might be to get your ruler out and use the scale just here and maybe measure how big the intertidal zone is along the front of the seawall and behind the seawall. So this is a good example of one of the questions that I would imagine will come up. As I said a minute ago, hard engineering hasn't come up for a little while, and therefore it's a nice opportunity to practice this. Almost every single time you get an 8 or a 6 mark question that's going to be quite challenging, there's probably a figure attached to it. In this case, the figure is only the picture that you can see. All I've done is move the question down over the top of the picture that I didn't think was relevant. You need to be able to identify what you can see in the picture. In this case, your command word is again explain, and you need to talk about how. So that how word is very important. You need to be clear about what hard engineering is. It is the sort of thing that Warrener students get wrong consistently. And they often, if they're asked to talk about soft engineering, they'll talk about hard engineering, and vice versa. It's just about being calm and making sure you get it right. This is a nice opportunity in the exam to just identify what you can see in the question and make a little plan.
What are they actually doing?
They are building a stepped sea wall. So this is the stepped element that would be at the front, and then that is a lit sea wall to kind of send the energy of the wave back. You need to know an example, so you are being told to give an example that you studied. The examples that you studied, the example that you studied was Ventnor. The other one you can use, I don't remember if there was anything specifically from Sea Falling, but you can use it if you can remember them for hard engineering. I think there were examples from it. You need to focus specifically on this. So from the effect of storm waves. So your link comes back to how does what I'm doing, how does this hard engineering method not just reduce the effect of erosion, but reduce the effect of storm waves, which happen in these sorts of areas quite frequently. Right, so as with all of these kind of questions, they're always going to be marked in levels. Your levels are always going to be basic, clear and detailed, and they're always going to work in the same way that's up on the board at the moment. It's very difficult when you ask what this paragraph, would that be a level 3 paragraph? They do identify level 1, 2 and 3 elements as you go through, and you've seen how they'll do that in the exemplar answers that you did for your homework. The bits that they'd be looking for here is they'd be looking for you to make sure you relate it back to the impact of storm waves. How does it reduce the impact and reduce the effectiveness of those storm waves? Okay, so that's one of the example that's up on the screen at the moment is one of the paragraphs that I probably write. Personally, I would like to be able to include some numbers or something about where it is specifically in Ventnor, but I don't have that information, so I can't use it, and there's no point in making it up. What's on there is a reasonable paragraph. It identifies something that's going on. I've deliberately picked that because it's something that I can use in the picture. It tells me to use figure 4 and it tells me to use an example. I've done both of those things in that paragraph. My next paragraph would be something like maybe tetrapods or riprap, or I might even change case study and go somewhere else. You don't necessarily have to compare it, but it does tell you to use figure 4 and it does tell you to use an example.
So as long as you use figure 4 in one of the paragraphs, then it should count?
Yeah. Okay. So this is how it's marked. So again, it's marked in exactly the same way. Personally, I think that the response from the examiner is quite a lot better this time round. Yeah, he does specifically mention Ventnor, and actually that's a really good way of, rather than using data like I like to use, the examiner has just used high-level terms, and he's talked about Figure 4 specifically to explain how they go about protecting it. So the key thing here, and the difficult bit, is the bit where they explain how. So his explanation of how starts to come in the last 4 lines. And if you were struggling with doing it yourself, one of the things that you can do at home with this is just have a quick look through what you've written and see whether you've made it clear how your seawall protects. And it might actually be one of the things that you go back a slide from me and actually go, well, actually, have you explained? And you're more than welcome to be critical. Right. The places that people trip up, specifically Warrener students, are places that I think Warrener students feel extremely comfortable. A question like the one up on the board, explain how urban areas can be made increasingly sustainable, is something that I think if you were to think of answering that question, you have loads and loads and loads of information. Warrener students in general, in this case, will either only lift from the information, or they will knowledge dump loads of stuff that they know rather than actually explaining how. What I'd like you to do is I don't want you really to answer the question, but I'd like you to have a look and see whether you've got an example of an eco-town, and then I'd like you to see if you've got an example of a sustainable development. The focus here is how is something that they've done made that urban area more sustainable. Again, it does say use figure 10. Figure 10 is this, so that's the picture and the information just there. Do not just lift from the information. The thing that people often struggle with in this case is that they just go, here, have a load of information about the example, rather than actually explaining what's happening in the example to make it more sustainable, which is the difficult part. And often, the thing that people did badly, and I think you guys might have done this as a mock, the thing that people do badly on with this is they just kind of lifted things and tried to generally explain, meant that the level of language was reasonably low. It was difficult without using an external case study away from the figure to get full marks as far as I was concerned. Okay, so probably the one that you guys are going to struggle with the most is this sort of a question. There'll be a prompt statement, and then you have to either agree or disagree with that statement. The mark scheme is set up to say to mark either for your response to be yes or no. I don't think that they're really looking for you to give a discussion. So they want you to either agree or disagree rather than discuss whether you should agree or disagree. And I think that that's the easiest way for you to get the marks. It gives you a load of information. This is often to do with wildfires or tropical storms.
How do tropical storms start?
These are the bits that I would worry about the most. The future bits are the important ones. They're the bits that are most difficult for you to study on. Then again, you require your peel structure. I would suggest 2 or 3 well-structured peel paragraphs. You need to make sure that you directly quote from figure 5, but you need to select and apply the appropriate information. In this case, you need to use your example, which is Black Saturday. You can use the one from the textbook, which is California as well, which is actually quite good for the way that it started. Black Saturday is just as good, and the one from the revision guide will help quite a lot. Yeah, again, peel structure is extremely important. So this is how the mark scheme is set up for that, and I think this is where a lot of you will struggle, because you've been taught throughout your whole academic career that in order to do something at a higher level, you need to discuss and analyse rather than just explain. I don't think there's a huge amount of a problem with you actually discussing, but I prefer you to either lean one way or another. And the question does ask you, do you agree or do you disagree? And then you should try and maintain that train of thought for 2 paragraphs. I think it'll be easier for you to get the marks in order to do that. And you can remember in this case that the mark scheme is set up for the examiner to mark your work like that as well. So they're only expecting you to either agree or disagree. It doesn't matter which one's which. In either case, you are entitled to all of the marks if you agree or if you disagree. It doesn't matter whether the examiner agrees with you or not, but remember that your link needs to be a little bit persuasive, not in the same way that you need to use a forest like you do in English, but you need to try and use evidence to support your point
Can
of
you
view.
give like